Okay, we find ourselves on Yud Dalid Amud Aleph on 14a. And we start with the word gufa. It's five lines down, the wide lines. I would think it's probably in the second, at least probably in the second page in Art Scroll by now, I think. But can someone corroborate that for us? We're looking for Gufa Kol Yados. We're getting toward the end. It's still a little bit before the Mishnah. Okay, so is it the second page in Art Scroll, just for those who are using it? That way everyone could orient themselves. Gufa Kol Yados Ha'ochen Sheb Sasan Begorin Tahoros. We're going back on that. We're returning to that idea about Yados. We're going to wrap up our discussion about handles. Okay? Anyone still need help finding it? Okay, here we go. So I think last time I realized that maybe I probably didn't do the best job explaining clearly some of the ideas. So the Gemara is doing us a favor, and we're actually going to rehash a little bit of what we talked about in the conclusion last time, which is probably where I did the worst job. So hopefully it'll be clear this time around. Just to jog our memories a little bit, we were talking about yados, which literally are handles that the same way they're attached to something that is susceptible to tuma, they also are susceptible to tuma as well. So gufa, kol yados ha'ochlen shebsasim begorer tahoros. So any yados, any shafts that are still attached to the ears of grain, let's say, that are in that area. So if they are bisasan, now what's bisasan mean? We'll explain that in just a moment. So then the handles become tahor. That even though they were used for food purposes before, now since they don't really serve the food anymore, they're not there, they're not subservient to the food that they are facilitating. Therefore, they are now tahor. They are disassociated from food. So again, to clarify, food remains inherently susceptible to tuma because food categorically is susceptible to tuma. But the question is the handle still considered a handle to the food that it is categorized as such? So Rabbi Yossi says that this act is not sufficient to reclassify it, but it remains tameh by virtue of being attached to the food. So my bisasan, what does bisasan mean? Rabbi Yochanan Amar bisasan mamish. Rabbi Lazar Omer hitter agdam. So one opinion is that you mamish are crushing it, you do an act to it. The other is that no, you just kind of let all the sheaves fall where they may. So Bishon Rabbi Elazar bisasan hitter agdan. So if it's the latter, that all you're simply doing, you're not actually crushing it, you're just letting them all fall out. So then Rabbi Yossi. So now we can understand why Rabbi Yossi would say it's still tameh, because you didn't actually change anything. You just untied them. Shkoyach. Why should that be sufficient enough to reclassify it if you didn't change anything? In the third parak of Sukkah, we're still in the first, but when we get there, God willing, we're going to talk about being kona b'shinoi, that when something is stolen, if in addition to being stolen, you also do something that changes it from original form, so then another party is able to acquire it because it becomes something fundamentally different. But here you didn't change anything. So Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Sasan Mamish, Amai, Matami Rabbi Yossi. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, if you actually crushed it, so why would that not be sufficient enough, according to Rabbi Yossi, to reclassify it? So Rishem and Lakish, because you can still use it for the pitchfork. The pitchfork, you get a good grip on the food because all of the sheaves are still there as well. So it serves a purpose, and therefore it remains susceptible to tuma. That's the basis of Rav Yossi's point. Now, just a nice little agadita that relates to this, I guess just by virtue of terminology. Amar Lazar, why is it that we compare the prayers of the righteous to a pitchfork? So, Af tfilasin shel tzadikim ma'apeches daito shel kadosh baruch hu lemidas achzarios lemidas rachmanos. That just as a pitchfork is able to move the wheat around and flip it over from one place to the next on the threshing floor, so too the prayers of the righteous have the power to, as it were, change God's mind on matters from cruelty to mercy. And it seems like a nice idea for pre-Rosh Hashanah. Am I right? So there you go. Okay, so that brings to the Mishnah one nice little cute little tidbit from Chashukei Chemed. We haven't used it in a while. Rav Zilberstein, just remind, these are like the quick, nice little question and answers, mini shalos and shuas that come up on the daf. So Rav Zilberstein has an interesting case based on this Agadata. Now, the cases he gives us, some of them are more of a stretch than the other of how they actually connect to the Gemara. This one is a little bit more of a stretch, but we'll go with it anyway. So the shaila is if someone needs to get a surgery, and both doctors, let's say he's living in Eretz Yisrael, so there's a doctor in Israel and there's a doctor in America, and both say that it's a 95% success rate. But the one in America is just like he does the surgery more frequently. So should he travel away from Israel to America to go to the doctor who more frequently performs that procedure, even if both doctors say that it has a 95% success rate? So he says, basically, I'm not going to go through the whole thing right now, but he notes that in religious literature, we see that there's a value to someone who is accustomed to doing different things. For instance, in Maseches Taanis, it says, when we are praying on fast days, that the elder of the community serves as the chazan. But it doesn't just say the elder, it says zaken v'ragil. Rashi explains, ragil is spal, someone who's used to davening. That utfilaso shagura bepiv v'lo yita. So someone who consistently is performing the same procedure over and over again, that's a significant enough of a difference from a religious standpoint as well, that we would value someone who consistently performs the same procedure medically and also perform the same procedure, whether it be tefillah or other religious requirements. And so he basically, his jump off point was talking about what's so special about the prayer of the righteous is not just simply that they're very holy individuals, but because they are constantly involving themselves in holy pursuits, they are like that doctor who's performed the procedure many times, and you would probably want him performing a surgery rather than someone who every now and then does it. Okay, so that's Rav Zilberstein. Okay, any questions before we go forward to the next Mishnah? Okay, to the next Mishnah we go. And my friends, we are returning to an idea that we learned in Tosfos. All the way at the beginning on Beis Amid Aleph, on 2a, we learned in Tosfos there that talked about what if you want to use boards for your schach, right? And the boards would probably keep most of the rain out or keep all the rain out. But Tosfos mentioned you're not allowed to use boards. Remember we talked about Gzeres Tikra. So we're returning back. We mentioned also between now and back then, but now we're really getting into it. Here's the Mishnah that discusses it. Okay, Misachichin binisarim dig Rabbi Yehuda v'Rameir oser. So Rabbi Yehuda says you can use boards, you can use planks as schach, right? Not just thin little branches. Rameir says nope, it will not work. And then the Seifa, the latter part of the Mishnah, says that if you put a board that is 4 tefachim wide on your sukkah, it will be kosher as long as you don't sleep under it. Now, who's that even going according to? Is that according to Rabbi Meir or is that according to Rabbi Yehuda? The Gemara is going to discuss it. But just to clarify, what do we mean when we say 4 tefachim? A little bit of background. We learned, I believe it was last week even, we looked at Rashi. Rashi told us that there's 2 ways that pasal schach can invalidate a sukkah. If you have 4 tefachim, right, just 4 handbreadths of pasal schach in the middle of your sukkah, it invalidates the sukkah. However, if the pasal schach is on the side, on the edge of your sukkah, then it actually requires 4 amos in order to invalidate the sukkah. Wow, how do we get from 4 handbreadths, right, 4 tefachim, to, an amos is like, around this big or so. So how do we get to 4 amos from there? That's a huge difference. So the answer is, Rashi tells us, it's our good old friend Amrin and Dofen Akuma, that we view the edge of the schach that is puzzle as an extension of the wall bending over, which would explain, you can't have your cake and eat it. If we're going to look at the puzzle schach not as puzzle schach, but as just an extension of the wall, then also by the same coin, you can't sleep under it or eat under it, because then you're sitting under a wall, not under schach. So that would seem to make sense, right? So that's what's important to keep in mind. 4 tvachim in the middle of a sukkah invalidates it. 4 amos on the edge of a sukkah invalidates it. We're going to make reference to that again, but the standard interpretation according to Rashi, I think the Ran differs, but the standard interpretation according to Rashi is that they are debating when it's on the side of the sukkah. Okay. So Amar Rav, machlokis b'nesaron. Okay, so this is one of those classic Gemaras where we have a machlokis about the scope of the machlokis. So we have a machlokis in the Mishnah between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir about whether planks are usher. But what the Mishnah does not tell us is how big are these planks that we are talking about. So what we need to figure out is the scope of their machlokis. What measurement of planks are they disputing? What do they agree on? What do they both agree on that is okay? What do they both agree on is not okay? And what is the range of this discussion? So the first understanding, there's only going to be 2 different opinions. Amarav machlokis b'nesaron sheyesh behen arba. The machlokis is when it is so wide, it's 4 tfachim wide. However, any less than 4 tfachim would be kosher according to everybody. Rabbi Meir islay gezeres tikra. The Rabbi Meir says that if it is 4 tfachim wide, so then you have the issue of gezeres tikra, in which you will confuse your sukkah with your house. You'll feel like you're living in a house rather than in a sukkah. Rabbi Yehuda leislay gezeres tikra, whereas Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned for gezeres tikra. But even according to Rabbi Meir, as long as it is less than 4 tfachim, then you do not have the issue of gezeres tikra, because then it's sufficiently thin enough that you will not come to confuse it with the roof of one's home. I guess it confused the roof. My home, well, you have to remember, the homes back then, you ever take a tour of ancient Israel, they didn't have the edifices that we have today. It's very conceivable that someone can mix it up with a living space. Ushmuel Amar, but Shmuel has a different opinion as to the scope of the machlokes in the Mishnah. Shmuel says, B'she'ein behen arba machlokes, the dispute is when the planks are less than 4 tfachim. But if it hits 4 tfachim, everybody agrees. Even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that something that big is going to be puzzle. Now the Gemara interjects. But wait a minute, you're telling me that the dispute is any measurement less than 4 tfachim? You're telling me that Rabbi Meir is going to say that a plank that is less than 3 tfachim is going to be an issue? Then you can't use anything, because less than 3 tfachim, they're just branches, basically. You tell me, then what can I use for my sukkah, according to Rabbi Meir? So Rav Papa, Hachi Kamar, Yesh behen arba divrei hakol psula. When there's 4 tfachim wide, everyone agrees it's puzzle. Hachos b'shlosh divrei hakol kshera. And when it's less than 3, everyone also agrees that it's kosher. My time, because then they're just branches. Ki pligi mishlosh arba. According to Rav, the scope of the machlokes is just between 3 to 4 tfachim. That range between 3 to 4 tfachim is where what the machlokes of our Mishnah consists of. Now, why though? What is so significant about 4 tfachim that everyone agree that it's puzzle, and why is 3 tfachim the cutoff that everyone would agree that less than that is for sure kosher? So Mar Savar came into Lisnu Shir Makom Lo Gazrinan, that according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, we actually were talking about this in the morning after Chakras for the. I think we have maybe one or two 6:30 folks on here. So we're talking about something called a makom pater in Hilchos Shabbos. So a makom pater has to be at least 3 tefachim high off the ground and 4 tefachim wide, because in halacha 4 tefachim wide makes something a makom bifnei atzmo, its own autonomous area. That's a general principle, not just in Hilchos Sukkah here. So Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning is, so long as the plank is less than 4 tefachim, it's less than a sheer makom. So it's not substantial enough that it would be an issue, that it would not be considered like normal skach. Umar Sabar, whereas Rabbi Meir holds, came into nafkilu mitoras lavud gazrina. So because there's an idea called lava that we've talked about many times, that anything less than 3 tefachim is considered contiguous, next to each other, connected. But once something is above 3 tefachim, then that's significant. That's a significant threshold in halacha. So basically, what's interesting here is that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, they both agree that once you exceed a certain threshold, that's when the boards are going to be problematic. The interesting part is that they're debating which particular halachic threshold did their predecessors intend. According to Rabbi Meir, it's lava, 3 tefachim is the threshold, whereas according to Rabbi Yehuda, a sheer makom, 4 tefachim is the threshold. So they agree in principle, they just have a difference of opinion as to which threshold should be applied here. Okay, let me pause for a moment. Any questions, anything to clarify on that? Okay, so just a very quick review on what we just observed. We observed that according to Shmuel, according to Rab, the range of the machlokis is when there are 4 tefachim. Whereas according to Shmuel, the machlokis is when it's between 3 to 4 tefachim. That's where the machlokis takes place. It's not. Now that we have an understanding, or 2 understandings rather, of the machlokis Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, we can now try to figure out when it says at the end of the Mishnah that if you have a schach that's 4 tefachim wide, meaning each plank's 4 tefachim wide, it's kosher as long as you don't sleep under it. So now let's try to figure out, is that going according to Rabbi Yehuda or going according to Rabbi Meir? It's not. So that's a quote from our Mishnah. As if it's 4 tefachim wide, it's kosher, but just don't sleep under it. So let's make sense of this line. Bishlama l'Shmuel damar b'she'ein behen arba machlokis ala yishven arba divrei kol psula. This makes sense according to Shmuel, that because Shmuel holds that everybody agrees once something is as wide as 4 tefachim, it will be pasul. Mishum hachi lo yashin tachtu. According to Shmuel, both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir agree, because their machlokis is about less than 4 tefachim. Both parties agree that if it is 4 tefachim wide, it'll be pasul. But it won't invalidate the sukkah, because if you put it on the side of the sukkah, the shear to pasul sukkah is not 4 tefachim, it's 4 amos. I realized as I was learning the Gemara, I was being confused by a particular detail. And just in case, maybe you're confused by the same thing, I want to clarify this. The measurement of 4 tefachim is coming up here for 2 purposes. Number 1, we need to determine at what point a plank is considered pasul material to use for a sukkah. So according to Shmuel, everyone agrees that 4 tefachim makes the schach invalid for use. But then we have to ask, where is it being situated? Now, if it's being situated in the middle of the sukkah, then by the same way it's pasul by being 4 tefachim, it also is big enough to pasul the entire sukkah. But if you have 4 tefachim on the side of your sukkah, even though that schach is pasul schach because it hit the threshold of 4 tefachim, it's inherently pasul schach, but it doesn't pasul the sukkah, because on the side it needs 4 amos to pasul sukkah. So we're asking 2 questions. One is, how big does it have to be intrinsically pasul schach? And then how big does it have to be and where in order to pasul now the entire sukkah by virtue of it being an issue? Does that distinction make sense? Did I explain that clearly? That's an important point. Should I rehash it? Or
yeah.
I should rehash?
No,
Okay.
the
question is, why is the sukkah not possible in its entirety if the skach is impossible?
Yeah, exactly. So as Lion said, that's the point I'm trying to get to, which is just because this plank might be pasul schach doesn't mean the entire sukkah is pasul. Now, if you covered your entire sukkah with these planks, it would be pasul because it's inherently pasul once it hits 4 tfachim. Yeah? But then the question is, okay, I have some pasul schach, but does that mean that the rest of the material in my sukkah is no longer considered good enough to make the sukkah kosher? So that depends where it's situated. If it's situated in the middle of the sukkah, it happens to be also that the shir makom, right, 4 tfachim, is the amount of pasul sukkah. But if I put it on the side, while that schach, that plank might be pasul, it doesn't invalidate the entire sukkah because we just view it as an extension of the wall. That's basically, yeah, Paul.
But I have, I think, a related question. Is there a different mitzvah to eat in the sukkah or sit in the sukkah versus to sleep in the sukkah?
So it's really all subsumed under what we're supposed to have is what's called yeshiva sukkah. Teshu came to do. We're supposed to dwell in the sukkah.
Right.
The funny thing is, post the Ramah, I think based on the Mordechai, we live in cold regions, or for those who are married. So if because your wife's brother from the sukkah, so maybe you don't have to be in the sukkah because it's mitzvah. There's different justifications. So, but really, the mitzvah is you're supposed to dwell in the sukkah. That means you're supposed to have your meals in the sukkah. It means you're supposed to sleep in the sukkah, and that's actually part of the mitzvah.
So it's the same mitzvah. How can it be okay for the people who sleep in it versus people who don't sleep in it?
Yes. So this is actually what I'm going to talk about between Chamarav on Sukkah, God willing. But because you come to the shir, you get to hear it first. There is an important principle throughout all of the laws of Yeshiva Sukkah. I believe we get to it in the second parak, which is called Teshu Kain Tuduru, which is we should dwell in our sukkah. And we talk about this in this parak also. That the important overarching principle is that we treat our sukkah like our homes. And so if your home, I remember, Zadie, remember during Hurricane Sandy in Bayswater, so all of our power was knocked out. It was really cold. We literally got out of our house, and I remember we moved into the Levine's home for a night, where we moved into someone else's home because they had heat. So it's because the parameters of sukkah, it's supposed to be a dwelling place. If it's no longer tenable for you to dwell in it, then you are patur from dwelling in it. That's just like a general. So the argument is that in colder regions where it's very difficult to sleep outdoors, so then you would be exempt because that's not a proper dwelling place at that time. That's the idea. Okay, very good. Did I answer the question, Paul?
Yeah, I think so. But okay.
All right, I'm happy to return to it at some point. We will get back to it at some point because it's going to come up in the Gemara. All right, but let me just start this section over again, just to reorient ourselves. So again, Tanan. If you have a plank that's 4 tfachim wide, it's kosher as long as you don't sleep under it, because we view it as an extension of the wall. Dofen akuma. According to Shmuel, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, they agree, it's unanimous, that 4 tfachim wide planks are pasul. So that's why they say it's only kosher if you put it on the side, and then you can dwell elsewhere in the sukkah. But according to Rav, who says that the machlokis is regarding 4 tfachim, but if it's less than 4, it's kosher. The Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda holds that a plank that's 4 tfachim wide is kosher. So why would Rabbi Yehuda say you can't sleep under it if 4 tfachim wide plank is kosher according to him? So me, Savre, Direi call he safe also Rabbi Meir. The answer you probably were thinking of, yeah. According to Rav, the seifa is in accordance with Rabbi Meir, and it follows his opinion. So it fits very nicely. Rabbi Meir says that a plank that's 4 tfachim wide is pasul, and therefore you can't sleep under it. Where Rabbi Yehuda would say, no, you could sleep under it because it's not dofen akuma, it's not the wall, it's legitimate schach, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. Going forward. Now we're going to bring a challenge against Rav. Tashima, Shnei Sedinin. So it's going to come up on Yud Zayin base, not too far in the future, I hope. Tashma, Shnei Sedin Mitzkarfen, Gesar and Aim Mitzkarfen. Right? Meir Omer after Sar Kistin. So two blankets, two cloths, which are puzzle to be used for skach, right? We don't use cloths for skach. They will, if each of them is less than 4 tefachim, they will combine together to reach the threshold of 4 tefachim to invalidate the sukkah. Whereas boards do not combine to reach the shear of 4 tefachim. That's the opinion that's attributed to Rabbi Yehuda. Right? Meir Omer after Sar Kistin, no. Boards will combine also to pass. Now, this machlokes about whether boards combine to reach a 4 tefach threshold fits nicely according to Shmuel. Because he says Rabbi Yehuda is when there's not 4 tefach. So Rabbi Meir holds that a board that is between 3 to 4 tefachim is possible. So Rabbi Meir is saying you have 2 boards that say they're 3.5 tefachim. Each one on its own is not enough, but combined they well exceed 4 tefachim. So those 2 boards, if they're juxtaposed, they will combine and they will be considered bigger than 4 tefachim and will certainly invalidate the sukkah. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda, who says that boards that are less than 4 tefachim are okay, well, then we have no problem for Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, but the issue is according to Rav. But for Rav says, according to everybody, if it's less than 4 tefachim, it's going to be kosher. So let's break it down. Why would Rabbi Meir? What is the case where Rabbi Meir would say the boards are too small on their own, but they can combine to be big enough to pass the sukkah? Now, if in the case each board is already 4 tefachim, well, we don't need to combine them because each one's 4 tefachim. They're already able on their own power to invalidate the sukkah. And if each board is less than 4 tefachim, then each board is less than tefachim, they're all inherently kosher. You know, you don't say the twigs on your sukkah combine to invalidate the sukkah. If it's less than 4 tefachim, even Rabbi Meir should be okay with it. So what is the case in which Rabbi Meir takes issue and says that that it combines? So the whole the ispahu arba. So the case is that the boards are actually have 4 tefachim on their own. What is the dispute? The dispute is whether they combine in order to invalidate the sukkah if there's enough of them from the side. According to Rabbi Yehuda, 4 tefachim planks are kosher. According to Rabbi Meir, 4 tefachim planks are inherently possible. And if you have enough of them next to each other on the side of the sukkah, if they eventually add up to more than 4 amos, then you will not be able to say dofen akuma, and the sukkah will be invalidated. That's the case. That's how Rav would have to understand this. We're going to go just a little bit further, but it's basically more or less the same principles, just rejumbled a little bit. Lishna Achrina, there's another version of how this goes down. Bishlama Lishmuel the Amar Bisha'im Behen Arba Machlokes Avayishan Arba Direkol Psula My Mitzarfim the Arba Amos Min Hatzan. According to Shmuel, the whole Machlokes, right? Shmuel is the one who says that when the whole Machlokes is when there's less than 4 tefachim, and the debate between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir consists of when the skach is on the side. El Rav, according to Rav, so Bishlam Rabbi Meir, so Rabbi Meir, so mine is from the Arba Amos Min Hatzan. So Rabbi Meir's position makes a lot of sense because Rabbi Meir is one who says that the 4 tefachim will be puzzle. So therefore they could combine. Rabbi Yehuda Arba Kshera, my Ma'im mitzarfin, Tanabala. What is he? What's the chiddush of Ma'im mitzarfin? Rabbi Yehuda holds that 4 fucking planks are inherently kosher. So what's the chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda saying they don't combine with each other? Of course they don't combine. Because what are you combining? Kosher plus kosher equals kosher. So the answer is I had to come right here mitzarfin or Yehuda ain't mitzarfin. It's just that it's using the same language. Since Rabbi Meir says that 4 fucking planks combine together to passel the sukkah, we say Rabbi Yehuda says they don't combine to passel the sukkah. But yes, it's logical that if a 4 tefach plank is kosher on its own, kosher plus kosher still equals kosher. So that's basically what it comes down to. And if you couldn't get enough of this sugya, God willing, when we pick up the Gemara next week, Mirza Hashem, we're still going to be talking about this. But I mean, basically, what this all comes down to is we have a machlokas, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, about boards, and there's a machlokas about what with boards they're debating. Are they debating 4 tvachim boards or between 3 to 4 tvachim boards? And then we just have to plug in each one and see how it makes sense with different rabbinic sources. But that basically brings us to the end of today. Any questions?
Yes, it seems to me that the whole machlokas revolves around how much one has to be able to see sunlight in the daytime and stars at the night when looking through the roof.
Not necessarily. The issue seems to come. It could come from Gezeras Tikra. Now, I guess in theory you could have sunlight coming through, but if it's so sturdy and you have these wide boards, it's essentially like you're sitting in your house at that point. You're gonna say, well, what's the difference here? What's the difference in my home? It's basically all the same at this point. So that's but Lav Davka, one doesn't necessarily need to see the stars for it to be a kosher sukkah. If you have a lot of branches and you're not seeing any of the stars, it would still be a kosher sukkah anyway. It's a bit of a misnomer, but yeah. All right, very good. So wishing everyone a kesiva v'chasima tova, a good gebenched yar, or shana tova for short. And God willing, next week we should pick it up on Thursday night, and hopefully in the schus of our consistent Torah learning, it should be a huge merit for us and for our loved ones as we enter into the Yom Noraim.
Amen.
Amen.
All right, take care, everyone.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, Mituka to everybody.
Amen.